There's been some great stuff this afternoon that I could heartily endorse. There's a few things that we may get to that we kind of the data says something else. But one of the loudest silences I've ever heard was at Manchester Business School with a room like this full of the glitterati, a lot from the world of finance, when I asked the question, just think for a moment, can you imagine a world without banks?
No.
And it's really difficult, isn't it? It's a really difficult thing to do. We're headed for a world without banks as we've known them. They've been a cornerstone of finance and society. They're being unbundled. We heard a lot about this earlier on. Why? Why? How has that happened? Okay? And one of the things I'm going to try and trace through is some of the fundamental forces that underlie the things that we've been hearing about. One of them is technology. One of them is online. Okay? But the other one that no one is really quite getting yet is this, that humanity is now hyper-connected. We can all talk to one another, and we do. So what? We haven't got it yet, okay? We can talk to one another. That's changed the dynamics of marketing, and it's changing and interacting with the online thing in other ways. So I want to take us on a journey to a different frame of reference. I'm going to be talking a lot about crowdfunding. We take an interest in all forms of crowdfunding. We call the Crowdfunding Centre, but we're most interested, and most of the things I'm going to be talking about today are about rewards crowdfunding, the Kickstarter model, the one that doesn't get noticed so much when we're all kind of focusing on equity and debt, because it's a new and revolutionary model. And it's not getting the understanding that it needs and deserves, because in fact, if the clicker works, clicker's not working. Can we have the next slide while we sort that out? Okay, that's better. Okay. So crowdfunding is the new seed funding. It's the engine room, it's the new engine room of innovation, of the collaborative economy, and of innovation more generally. And what we're seeing in the data very clearly, and you'll see some of the numbers in a moment or two, is we're seeing a global wave of sustained, ongoing innovation like we have never seen before. We're seeing a way of opening doors and allowing people to create in ways that have never happened before. And that's create products, create services, create ventures, create businesses, and create jobs. And it's quite difficult to kind of put this in perspective, but one of the things that we can now see from the data is that crowdfunding, as the new seed funding, integrates with existing models like equity and debt, but it's a different animal. It fits in with them, and in fact it complements them in many ways. And already in the UK, in terms of its impact and its effect, it's at least as important as angel or VC funding. Okay, so I said I'd do a little bit of introduction. This is the Crowd Data Centre. We collect data from across the world and have been doing for way over 2 years now. And as you can see over there, there's some stats. 363,000 projects, it's more than that now, that we've tracked every day. So we know how many backers they had on any given day, and on the next day and the next day. We know how much money they raised we know when updates went out and what effect they had, and so on. So we've accumulated a huge amount of data. We've seen almost 2 billion dollars worth equivalent raised globally in that time. And we estimate that globally rewards crowdfunding is probably 4 times that, particularly if you start to factor in China and other areas where we don't see. We see all the major platforms. We can't cover all the niche platforms as well. Okay, so huge diversity across 40 different sectors, and you can see technology is a very big sector there, film's quite a big one, gaming is a big one, health is a big one, and so on. Okay, so I mentioned most of this already. We've tracked, getting on for 400,000 projects daily across 222 countries, almost 2 billion, and it continues to grow. Okay, but as I said, what I want to do before we continue and take a look through a little more of the data and put it in perspective, is I want to do this journey. So I want to ask a couple of fundamental questions, and the reason I want to ask these questions is crowdonomics, which is mentioned there, is what we want to do is we want to understand and explain how and why this is different. How come it's able to do things that equity and debt can't do? Because it clearly can do that, as well as how it fits together with them. And what are the underlying forces? And where we are, crowdonomics will be research that we'll be publishing later this year. But from the data, we can now see the underlying mechanics in terms of the marketing, in terms of the interaction, in terms of the relationships, and the differences in how that works between a creator of whatever sort and the crowd, as opposed to a producer or a corporate and a market. And they're very different dynamic. And there's 2 or more forces crossing over. There's 2 mountains to climb in every crowdfund. Maybe we'll get to some of that in a few minutes. But to understand it, what we've found is actually to get under the skin of this, you really have to go to some of these more fundamental questions, like, what is an economy for? Okay, job supply is shrinking. We're replacing human beings with machines, artificial intelligence. So, someone talks about the job apocalypse, but it's well known and understood the job supply is shrinking massively as a result of automation and so on. So is that what it's for? Is it to make the numbers as big as possible? The national bottom line bigger? Or is it to make people productive, healthy, happy as a result? Okay? Also, what is wealth? What constitutes wealth? Actually looking at the numbers and the money really, in terms of mere material possessions, isn't enough. It's not enough. Okay, so I wanted to do a little thought experiment for once. This is Titan. This is the world's 2nd biggest supercomputer. And it has one advantage over the world's biggest supercomputer, which is in China, is it's way more photogenic, as you can see. The other one's a bit messy, because it's growing the whole time. The other one's 6 times bigger. But I want you to imagine what the world could be like if there were as many of these as there were mobile phones. What would the world be like if they were all mobile and they could walk around and do stuff? What would the world be like if they were interconnected? I'll come back to that in a second. What we have on every pair of shoulders here is that kind of processing power, that kind of capability. And the model of education, the model of industrialization, the model of society as we have it doesn't maximize that. It doesn't even recognize that because guess what? Future generations are going to be generations that do maximise that release that power to create and the wealth that goes with it. Matthew Ridley, in a really good TED talk called When Ideas Have Sex and Have Children, which are also ideas, asked how did we become the only species that becomes more prosperous as we become more populous? You know, we traditionally think there's a limited food supply, you know, the population goes up and, you know, it all kind of evens out, Malthus and Darwin and all that. And actually that's the model we think in commercially a lot of the time as well. It's about market share and sharing it out. It's a zero-sum game. But actually, we're not in a zero-sum game, certainly not now if we ever were, because at some time in history, some people worked out how to create more food from the same amount of land and so on. Farming, agriculture, agrochemicals, genetic engineering, in goes brain power and creativity, and out comes wealth. Okay? So, actually, this is a very different game we're in. And we all know that because of that hyperconnectivity, the world's been turned upside down. It's actually the crowd that are now in charge. And if you doubt that, go and knock on number 10, you know, after the Panama Papers, and just ask David Cameron whether he feels really in charge right now, because he is, because of interconnectivity, in the course of public opinion. And his job right now is on the line. So we're no longer in a zero-sum game. We're in a game where actually if you can create more food, you can create just about anything, or find ways to do without it, or create substitutes, or whatever. I'll speed up a little bit, but it's going to take a little while. Okay, so increasing the number of people increases the potential. And connecting us, as it always does, increases it exponentially. Okay, so this is Brad Templeton. We met him in Turkey when we were speaking together at this conference. This is a hyperbolic curve. This is the growth curve we are on, right? And we are somewhere here. We're in actually the deceptive disappointment phase. We all expect things to go on a linear because that's what we're taught and that's what we're used to. We're actually on this curve. And someone said earlier that experience, you know, is valuable. Yes, it is, except when it misleads you, except when the rules have changed, except when you actually really need now insight, not insight into the financial systems that we grew up with. And a chap from McKinsey spoke at the same conference just before that, making exactly that point, that we need to learn the new rules in order to understand what's going on. So imagine countless overlapping networks of these human supercomputers, each focused on a vision that they share. Many, many, many of them. That's a reasonable approximation to what you see with crowdfunding, especially with rewards crowdfunding. So, welcome to the crowd economy. Innovators and early adopters, everyone in this room and most of the people involved, we haven't even begun on the early majority, where the first big chunk comes. We're just beginning to nibble at that. They're just beginning to stroke their chins. Now, the quick tour I promised you through the data, to put it in perspective, it came out on Sunday, big expansion in angel funding, stairway to entrepreneurial heaven, some data. Over 4 years, the Angel Co-Fund with the British Business Bank has helped 59 companies. It's grown 11% and put in 27.5 million. Over 1 year, last year, in the UK, this kind of funding funded over 4,000 UK ventures. 4,000. Double the amount of money. and part funded and helped to understand the process and to train 15,000 more. Okay, very quickly. Here are the figures for the UK. The total pledges over the last 12 months to the end of last month were up 54%. Total raised was up by 35%. And we're growing quickly. We could do more on the data, but I think I've got a lurker behind me. So let me just come to the finale here and say what I want to do and what I want you to do, ideally, is I hope this is kind of an eye-opener. I hope that when you hear the word crowdfunding, which has been stretched so thin, it's used for almost everything, to remember two things. One, that equity crowdfunding is mostly displacing, in a good way, traditional angel funding. It's expanding it a bit, but not a lot. Peer-to-peer finance is mostly, with honourable exceptions, displacing and taking online traditional lending. This is completely different and new, and this is the new economy. Thank you.